Please stand to welcome the presiding member, Mayor Emma Cole.
Thank you. I declare the meeting open at 2 minutes past 6 o'clock. On behalf of the City of Vincent, I pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land, the Wadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Also, just to let the members of the public gallery know that we do now live stream our meetings over the web, but we do not live stream question time. So during the time at which you're speaking, that section's not transmitted, and we'll commence proceeding that transmission after question time. CEO, do we have any members on leave or any apologies this evening?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we have Councillor Gontaszewski on leave of absence.
Thank you. We'll now move to public question time. So this is your opportunity to address council and ask questions. We do ask that you speak for just 3 minutes. The CEO does time, so at 3 minutes I will let you know that you've reached the 3-minute mark. And if you could please come forward and state your name, your address and the item to which you're speaking to tonight. There's no order, it's just whoever comes up to the microphone. So first speaker, please. This evening, and we'll move on to 3B, which is response to previous public questions taken on notice.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's just for noting. The information's been included in the agenda papers.
Thank you, CEO. We've now commenced live streaming of our council meeting. For those joining us from home and online, we welcome you to the meeting. We've just completed public question time, so thanks for joining us. CEO, do we have any applications for leave of absence?
No, I've not received any, Mayor Cole.
I think we have, from Councillor Loden.
Apologies, I stand corrected. Apologies, Mayor Cole. Councillor Loden's requested a leave of absence from 26th of September to the 28th of September, inclusive, for work reasons.
Could I have a mover for the request for taking leave? Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Murphy. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Moving on to deputations, petitions and presentations, we have none this evening. And moving on to confirmation of minutes, we've got 2 sets of minutes for this evening. We've got the special council meeting of the 14th of August. Could I please have a mover to adopt the minutes? Councillor Harley, seconded Councillor Hallett. All those in favour? I declare it carried. And the ordinary meeting of the 22nd of August 2017. Can I have a mover for those minutes, please? Councillor Loden, seconded Councillor Murphy. All those in favour? Declare the minutes carried. Now we'll just move to some announcements by the presiding member. I do have a few announcements to make this evening. First of all, I'd like to talk about the Imagine Vincent Community Panel. We have a community panel that is meeting over 2 Saturdays. They commenced their work last Saturday and they'll be meeting again this Saturday. And their job is to work through and help prioritise the very extensive feedback and ideas generated from our community over the last 3 months of our Imagine Vincent campaign with our community. During the last 3 months, we met with 1,041 people directly. We received 4,204 suggestions, more than 32,000 direct mail contacts were made, and we also held 38 events and conversations with our community. So we're very excited to be running one of the first truly randomly selected panels in Perth, with 40 community members selected completely independently from council, to the point that when council members attended to welcome them, we had no idea who we would see in the room, and it was good to see some fresh faces. We do respect and trust our community to receive the same information that council would receive and to make fair and equitable recommendations for the rest of our community. So they will continue to walk through some very thought-provoking, interesting and challenging topics and some competing expectations from our broader community. So we wish them well and we look forward to seeing the results through our community panel. I'd also just like to note that last Wednesday we welcomed 51 new citizens to Vincent at Royal Park Hall. We're taking a new approach to our citizenship ceremonies, where we're actually taking them out and about to our halls and moving around Vincent. We've professionalised our ceremonies with our function squad. We've been engaging local choirs, and on last Wednesday night we were very fortunate to experience the Gay and Lesbian Singers of WA, who sang beautifully, and we're also using local eateries and hotels as part of getting out into our community. We've had some really positive feedback from citizens and their families and friends that attend with them, who are saying how engaging and welcoming this new approach to citizenship ceremonies has been. I'd also just like to mention the Vincent Love is Love campaign of support, which we're running during the postal survey period. This is something that the City of Vincent Council and staff are supporting and celebrating in support of our strong LGBTQI community. We're providing a visual display of support through flying the rainbow flag at administration at Axford Park. We've got Vincent Love banners on Scarborough Beach Road and Fitzgerald Street in our town centres, and we're celebrating Vincent Love stories on social media. We really want to let our LGBTQI community know that we support them, and to reinforce our long-standing commitment to marriage equality during this pretty difficult time. I've received a lot of public positive feedback. There has been a very small number of negative responses, I'd say less than 5, but overwhelmingly our community has really got behind this. It's been received really well, and there's a lot of community pride and compassion around what we're doing. Finally, just to mention that the Leaderville Connect AGM is happening on Wednesday, September the 27th at 6 p.m. at Kalis in Leaderville. Leaderville Connect has invited famous Sharon along to the evening, so that should make it pretty fun. And she's going to be there promoting their upcoming Fringe Hub event, which is gathering a lot of momentum as venues, traders and local businesses and artists get on board. It's pretty exciting to think of Fringe coming to Vincent, and kudos to Leaderville Connect for helping to make this happen. So if there are any Leaderville residents or businesses that haven't gone along and seen what Leaderville Connect is about, I'd strongly encourage them to do so, because there's always something exciting and innovative happening with Leaderville Connect. Thank you. That's the announcements for this evening. Yes, we'll just move now to some declarations of interest. Thank you, CEO.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I've received 3. The first is from Councillor Josh Toppelberg. It's a proximity interest in relation to, a financial interest in relation to item 9.2. The nature of the interest being that the adjacent property at 560 Charles Street is owned and occupied by an immediate family member of Councillor Toppelberg's. Councillor Toppelberg is not seeking approval from Council to participate in the debate or remain in the chamber or vote on the matter when it's discussed. The second disclosure I've received is also a financial interest disclosure from Councillor Jimmy Murphy in relation to both items 9.6 and 9.11 on tonight's agenda. The extent of the interest is that Councillor Murphy received an election-related gift from Jason Anzac of the Leaderville Hotel during the 2015 ordinary local government election, when Councillor Murphy was last elected to council, and he has also been engaged by Leaderville Connect to organise the 2017 Leaderville Carnival, which Leaderville Hotel may provide support or sponsorship of. Councillor Murphy is not seeking approval from Council to participate in the debate or remain in chambers or vote on the matter when it's discussed. And lastly, a proximity interest disclosure from Councillor Jonathan Hallett in relation to agenda item 9.1, the extent of the interest being that Councillor Hallett lives directly across the road from the subject site. Councillor Hallett is requesting approval from Council to remain in the chamber, participate in the debate and to vote on the matter. Should Council wish to consider Councillor Hallett's request, you can do so in accordance with Clause 2.17 of the Standing Orders, as well as Section 5.68 of the Local Government Act, and I'd be happy to outline for Council in doing so what the criteria are that you must be satisfied with. Through you, Mayor Cole, Council can consider Councillor Hallett's request to participate in debate and vote on this particular item that Councillor Hallett's declared a proximity interest in at this stage of the meeting. That would be the simplest thing to do. I'd have to ask Councillor Hallett to leave the chamber in accordance with the relevant provisions of Council's Standing Order local laws when that decision is made.
Councillor Hallett, if you would mind just leaving the chamber while we discuss this request. Thank you. Before taking a vote on the matter, I think if we could just get some advice from the CEO in relation to the proximity interest.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Council members, in accordance with section 5.68 bracket 1 of the Local Government Act and the various subclauses under that subsection, Council may approve Councillor Hallett to remain in the chamber, vote on the, or participate in the debate and vote on the matter, providing that a couple of criteria are met. They are as follows: that firstly, Councillor Hallett has disclosed the nature and extent of the interest, which I can confirm he has done in writing, and I've read that out. And secondly, the remaining members of Council that are present in the room decide that Councillor Hallett's interest is one or the other of the following. Firstly, so trivial or insignificant as to be unlikely to influence the disclosing member's conduct in relation to the matter, or is common to a significant number of electors or ratepayers. I can confirm that the second option is not available to Council because Councillor Hallett's interest of living directly across the road from the subject site is not common to a significant number of electors or ratepayers. So if Council were to support Councillor Hallett's request, it must do so on the basis that Council considers Councillor Hallett's interest to be so trivial or insignificant as to be unlikely to influence his conduct in relation to the matter.
Just a point of order, if I may. It's a procedural motion, so there's no debate. Is that correct? It's just a straight vote, or is there opportunity for discussion or question?
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, it's not a procedural motion. It's a matter that Council needs to determine. Through you, Mayor Cole, Council members, the Mayor just questioned that in the absence of a mover and a seconder, what would the consequence of that be? And the consequence would be that Council has not granted its permission, and as a result, when Council reaches that item of the agenda, Councillor Hallett would need to leave the room because permission has not otherwise been granted by Council. That is the default requirement of the Act.
Do I have a mover for this item? Councillor Toppelberg. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Loden.
Yeah, I'm moving it specifically to vote against it because I think that the idea of saying that someone living directly across the road from a property is so trivial as to not to potentially influence is a dangerous precedent, and so I'd like to actually record my vote against it.
Councillor Loden.
I would agree with Councillor Toppelberg on this one as well.
Councillor
Through
Howley.
you, Chair. Sorry, just to clarify, I'm sure you covered this. Is Councillor Hallett an owner of that property or a part owner of that property?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I couldn't tell you immediately. I'm sure we could find out right now from Councillor Hallett. Councillor Hallett's disclosure of interest form states that he lives directly across the road.
So that's my question through the Chair about whether he's an owner or just a tenant, because that makes a difference to the way I vote.
Well, my understanding is that he's declared a proximity interest on the basis of location rather than financial declaration, but Tim is checking.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the Manager of Governance and Risk has just advised that in checking with Councillor Hallett, he's indicated, or he has stated that his partner owns the house. He is a resident of it.
Councillor Halley, do you wish to comment?
No, I just needed that answer.
Okay. Any further comments in relation to the request? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour of Councillor Hallett being given permission to participate? All those against? I declare it lost. Councillor Hallett, just to confirm that the request was voted down, and at the time that we reach that item, we will have to ask you to leave the chamber while we debate and vote on that item. We'll now move on to reports. In addition to those already raised by the public gallery, if we just move around the chamber to see whether council members wish to draw forward any further for debate. Councillor Hallett, do you have anything that you wish to call forward?
Just 11.6.
Councillor Buckles. Thank you. Councillor Loden.
10.5.
Councillor Toppelberg.
9.8, thank you.
Sorry, was that 9.8?
9.8, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Murphy.
9.10, thanks. 9.10.
Councillor Harley.
Nothing further.
Also, we will need to discuss the urgent business item, which is the garden competition. And I think also there is an amendment for item 11.1. Oh, sorry, that's already absolute majority. An amendment for... I'll also call forward 11.5. The CEO will now take us through which items will be moved en bloc this evening.
Thank you, Mayor Cole, council members and members of the gallery and anyone else live streaming at home. Under council standing orders, council will now consider adopting en bloc a range of items and recommendations that are presented, and the standing orders stipulates that specific items cannot be adopted en bloc. They are items that a public question on which a public question has been raised, absolute majority items, and as the Mayor's indicated, items that council members have raised to be discussed separately. Additionally, there are items to be withdrawn which have been the subject of a financial interest disclosure from a council member. So I'll read now the list of items that council will be adopting en bloc as per the recommendations presented in the agenda. They are item 9.4, Gibney Ave in Mount Hawthorn; item 9.9, review of the Design Advisory Committee policy; item 10.2, tender for provision of small maintenance services; 10.3, provision of plumbing and gas fitting; 10.4, provision of electrician services; 11.2, financial statements; 11.3, authorisation of expenditure; 11.4, investment report. And through you, Mayor Cole, I'll just explain the reason that item 9.11 will not be adopted en bloc is Councillor Murphy's financial interest disclosure in that matter.
Thank you, CEO. So the first item, we now go through the reports in the order in which they've been raised. Oh, my apologies. We need to move and second the en bloc items. Do I have a mover?
Just point of order, and 13.1, the information bulletin will also be received as part of those items.
13.1 is being moved en bloc as well.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, apologies, that's correct.
So adding 13.1 to the items to be moved. Do I have a mover for the en bloc items? Councillor Murphy, seconded Councillor Harley. All those in favour? I declare the en bloc items carried. Thank you. So, as I was saying, we'll now move through the order of business, and starting off with items raised by the public gallery tonight. So the first item that was raised is item 9.6, which is number 742 Newcastle Street, Leederville, proposed amendment to first floor trading hours of previous approval, and this concerns the Leederville Hotel. Do I have a mover for this item? Moved Councillor Buckles, seconded Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I'm generally supportive of the recommendation in front of us today. I do acknowledge the issues that have been raised by the member of the gallery, and I guess I do consider that they're two separate applications, and that I don't really want to tie one to the other, but I do, obviously hope that it gets resolved as soon as possible, and that our administration are paying it due attention, because it's 2 years does sound like a long time to be for these sort of things to go on. The outdoor area at the back of the Leadville Hotel, I can see that has the potential to raise significant noise issues. It was due to the interesting, the fairly lightweight roofing material, should we say? But I think that this application is separate for an area that should be able to contain its noise reasonably well. Thanks.
Just through the chair, a couple of questions through the Director of Development Services that were raised from the floor. A request for deferral based on the trading hours proposed, a requirement for community consultation to be undertaken. I don't actually know what an ETP is, but what that question was in regards to windows and doors being closed, and the no live bands as well. If you could provide a response to those queries, please.
Could I also provide a bit of clarification to that? I think the question was around, can the city approve a planning approval for extension of hours before the extended trading permit has been authorised by what was the Department of Liquor, Racing and Gaming, which is now another agency name, which I haven't quite committed to memory just yet. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I must say I haven't committed that to memory either, so I'm going to stick with Department of Racing, Gaming and Liquor for the time being. The extended trading permit is an application to the Department of Racing, Gaming and Liquor it's an application to extend their liquor licence, the Leadville Hotel's liquor licence. They have an existing ETP in place. So the applicant, or the Leadville Hotel, lodged an application at the start of the year to amend their existing ETP, proposing that the hours for the upstairs, the first floor area, the Babushka Bar, be extended from 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. The response from the Department of Racing, Gaming and Liquor was that there is no planning approval in place for those hours, and so the applicant was required to first consider whether they would apply for and seek approval for and see if they could gain approval for an extension to their operating hours, which is this application. So there is no conflict between the two. The applicant is required to have both approvals in place, and they are completely independent of each other and governed by separate legislation. So this application must be considered on its planning merits under the planning legislation. In relation to the other queries, for advertising, the application was advertised to all owners within the Leadville Town Centre, essentially. You can see the plan as part of attachment 1 indicates the extent of consultation. So 565 letters were sent out as part of advertising. There was a sign placed on site, I notice, on our website. In relation to the doors being left open, one of the conditions of the acoustic assessment that was done was that these doors must remain closed, and as part of the noise management plan that is conditioned as part of the recommendation is for the applicant to detail how they will make sure the doors are closed. Obviously the doors will need to be opened occasionally if they're travelling in and out of the venue, but those balcony areas will actually be off limits, so they're not part of this recommendation, so they won't be able to be used between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. either. So it's not considered that there will be an issue with those doors being left open and issues with management of that. In relation to the live music, I can't comment on the conditions of the ETP in relation to live music because I haven't confirmed that, and I can't confirm that now, so I need to take that on notice. But nevertheless, the applicant is able to apply to amend that condition, as they are currently seeking to amend the hours to extend them. I think I've covered everything, but if I've missed something, please let me know.
Thank you. I tend to agree with Councillor Buckles on this one. These are separate developments, so with the noise complaints that are raised, and that's what we're considering here. And this development does seem to be appropriate in this case. I do see that there's a proposed amendment from Councillor Hallett, but I'll let him talk to that amendment.
Councillors?
Through you, Chair, I've got a question in regards to the addition of balconies. So, I'm just trying to find the number here. It's attachment 2 on page 212. There's a new balcony being added on, and also understand there's an existing balcony for what is now the upstairs. I'm not sure what the name of it is. I haven't been in there for a very long time. But the area that looks north, so when you go out onto the balcony, there's quite a larger decking area. It overlooks north and it overlooks into the outdoor drinking area. Those are the only bits of this that concern me, because they are the areas that smokers go out onto. That the opening and closing of the doors will be an issue. I think it's even an issue, to be frank, at 1 o'clock in the morning. The noise from the Leederville Hotel travels. Now, I don't live in the area. I'm not personally affected by it, but I have been there at various times of the night, and the noise can be heard certainly down onto the intersection and further on a very still night. So I would be concerned about any opening of those balcony doors at all, and I'm actually concerned that they're putting a new balcony in, given that it's an obvious point for noise to be getting in and out as people are going to access it, particularly if it's made a smoking zone. So I'm not sure whether the Leederville Hotel could make it a smoke-free balcony, perhaps, but smoking absolutely increases the amount of use that people are going to have onto those balconies, and that's the bit that's bothering me, because I don't believe that noise won't travel.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the plan included on page 213 and the other plan on page 212 is the current existing planning approval. So if those balconies are already approved, so this application is not for a new balcony, it's just to amend the operating hours of the first floor. Condition 1.1a, the middle part, specifically prohibits or specifically sets the hours of operation of those balcony areas and limits them to 11 a.m. to midnight Monday to Saturday and 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Sunday, which is the current hours. So that's the current approval, which is not proposed to change. So the only change that's being recommended here is the internal area of the first floor from a closing time from 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. on Friday and Saturday.
Sorry, through you, Chair, to the Director. Just, I guess it's just a small point, but it is a diagram in our current plans before us, and it clearly states it as a new balcony. So, I don't go to Leederville Hotel very often, so I don't know the layout to that degree. But I take your point that it's an existing balcony. It doesn't change my view about that they should be asked to make it a non-smoking balcony, and they should be severely restricted in the use of that door. I do think before 1 o'clock, if they were amenable to that, and to shut that balcony door down earlier, unless it leads to a fire exit, of course.
Councillor Hallett.
Yes, I do have, a couple of concerns about the application, and so I've foreshadowed the amendment that I'll be putting forward. But it relates specifically to extended trading, and specifically in this case until 3 a.m. Research by National Drug Research Institute at Curtin Uni specifically has examined the effect of extending trading permits in Perth. They found a 70% increase in assaults in premises with later trading, so those are the places with 1 or 2 additional hours of trading after midnight. And those that are trading normally, so just to midnight closing, had a significant reduction in the number of times they were cited as the last place of drinking by a convicted drink driver with a blood alcohol level above 0.08. As you'd expect, average alcohol purchases for extended trading premises are significantly higher than those without, and there was a strong link between an increase in alcohol purchases and an increase in violence. The introduction of extended trading permits in Metro Perth has had a definite effect on the timing of alcohol-related incidents, of harm for many premises. So the main harm indicators, road crashes and violent assaults. There's a consistent and obvious shift in the timing of these incidents to increase after midnight. So given that, I do have some concerns about extending it, the evidence suggests that the success of measures to disperse patrons from licensed venues is related to transport availability rather than extended trading hours to provide staggered closing times, which is one of the, arguments provided by the applicant. In this instance, though, of course, ready public transport access is available in Leederville. We'll talk about taxis later on in the agenda. So that alleviates some of the concern about the mass exodus of patrons out of these types of venues. But the amendment that I'd like to put forward is specifically around, the diversity of the types of venues that we approve, and specifically for this one, it's related to extended training for a supper club. Having diverse venues, small venues as well, add to vibrancy for commercial precincts, the flow-on benefits to other establishments within the local nighttime economy. And if it caters for a different crowd, that can reduce the impact that a licensed venue can have on the wider community. My main concern, though, is that once granted this approval, that the venue could slowly morph into a different style of venue rather than a supper club that is perhaps a little bit less intimate and relaxed. So I've proposed an amendment to clarify some of those, and I can leave it there or move that as well.
So, Councillor Hallett, I assume you're referring to the amendment on the pink. Everyone has that before them. Do I have a seconder for this amendment? Councillor Loden. Councillor Hallett, do you wish to speak to the amendment?
Just essentially, it details some, specific information that would be required within a management plan to identify how this particular venue will provide and the type of live music, the type of food and when food is served, furnishings and other kind of management around the venue set up internally.
Councillor Loden, any comments on this amendment? Councillor Toppelberg.
Just a question, because in the policy itself, it refers to a detailed management plan addressing a number of matters, and some of those are quite different to what's there, but there's a catch-all at the end, so the question's probably to the CEO. There is a catch-all at the end that says any other appropriate matters as required by the City Chief Executive Officer. I assume that any matters, if it was a decision of Council that fell under here that weren't covered in, could not be disputed because they would then deem to be a decision of Council and at the discretion of the Chief Executive Officer to be able to force the applicant to comply with. Would that be correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think that is not automatically or necessarily the case. If this were given
Should
that...
I perhaps be more specific because the policy... Sorry to interrupt, but because the policy says that a detailed management plan shall address floor plans, so it doesn't mention about furnishings, noise control and management, number of patrons, hours of operation, patron and antisocial behaviour, traffic, car parking, rubbish collection and disposal, and any other appropriate matters, not specific things like type of music or the promotion or otherwise. And I'm just concerned that whilst Council may make a decision, the policy doesn't specifically require them to submit that information. If there is a divergence between the two, are we able to require it of them by decision of Council?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think there's a couple of questions in there. I'm quite sure I understand them. So the first is that the defensibility of the condition that's up on the screen in front of you now, I think it's completely fair and reasonable. If Council's concern is that the policy would require a management plan to address things in addition to the points that are specified in this condition, then that would easily be addressed by adding the words but not limited to after the word including at the end of the first paragraph. But if the first point I raised is the case, then personally I'm satisfied that that's an entirely acceptable condition. And there wouldn't be a contradiction or an argument that could successfully be raised that this is over and above what the policy entertains, because the policy serves as a guide for making decisions in respect of proposals. In this instance, Council is exercising its discretion to extend the provisions or the matters that the management plan needs to address over and above whatever is specified as a default requirement under that policy.
Director, do you have any further comment?
No, the CEO's covered it perfectly.
Okay. Councillor Toppelberg.
Just for clarity, what would be, if at some point, if this was passed and it was approved, if at some point, and the question is to the Director, if at any point the applicant wished to change the nature of the venue? Would it require a new DA, or change an amendment to the management plan that could then be approved by the officers?
Through the Mayor, the applicant could apply to amend the management plan. However, it's pretty clear that they get one bite at the cherry here. The city would endorse the management plan as soon if this is adopted. Then the city would endorse the management plan. They could still apply to amend it, but my view would be that wouldn't be appropriate, and it would need to come back to council to amend the condition to specify exactly what the changes are that they're now proposing.
Councillors, any further comments on the amendment? Councillor Buckles.
Just got a question through you to the Director, Chair. Look, in terms of expanding the contents of the management plan won't come back to council, will it? No. So do you take the guidance here to expect them to be a stricter management plan, or would this result in a fairly similar management plan? Obviously, it's the venue's management plan to put forwards. Have we just, I just want to know, are we requiring more detail, or is it just in the administration's comment it says if council considers appropriate to further restrict the use of the area, or is that advice to us that we could change it even more to restrict? I don't really know. A supper club is not a use category. Yeah.
Through the Mayor, yes, this condition will lead to the use of that space being restricted further. So it will require a lot more detail to be provided in the management plan, in addition to what would ordinarily be there, and that will clearly, as outlined in those dot points, restrict the use of that space further. Currently, the use of the space is approved as a hotel, and it's a very broad land use. This is being very specific that the space can only be used for a supper club, and that in accordance with that proposal from the applicant, we need to see all the detail and approve all the detail around how the space will be used to ensure that it is being used as a supper club, not as a nightclub or some other use that broadly fits within the definition of hotel, which is quite, as I said, a broad land use.
Through you, Chair. May I ask, through the Director, for the record, could you outline the difference between a supper club and a nightclub, and what are the types of things from a compliance perspective you would be looking for that supper club to maintain an identity as a supper club in its operation?
Through the Mayor, I think the list here outlines the areas where a nightclub or this development would need to specify how it's different to, say, a nightclub. So in relation to the promotion and advertising, it would need to be advertised and promoted as a supper club and not as a nightclub. The type of music, the type of music that we see in nightclubs in Leederville would not be the type of music that will be appropriate to be defined in this management plan. So we're looking at live music. We're looking at what the applicant has called chilled and relaxed music in their proposal. Food will need to be served throughout the period that the supper club is open, unlike in a nightclub where there is no food available. The furnishing will need to be allow people to sit and to relax in that context, as opposed to a nightclub where there may be no furnishing or just bar stools. And the applicant has made it clear that they would make the space available for private functions up until 3 a.m, so that would also need to be in the management plan, and again would impact how they advertise the premises.
Thank you. Are there any further comments on the amendment? Look, I'll speak then. Look, I do support the amendment. I think that the applicant has proposed this through their application, that this is actually, in their own words, an alternative venue to a nightclub. That they want to have the staggered departures, they want to have a live music option which is chilled and relaxed, and that the supper club is really focused around premium artisan spirits and relaxed surroundings. And I understand they've also verbally confirmed that they will be providing food throughout until 3 a.m. So I think that this is something that the applicant applicant has themselves put forward, and I think that that is quite a different proposition to something which could otherwise be a nightclub. So on that basis, and on the basis that the applicant themselves have put forward this concept, I do support the amendment. Are there any further comments? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? All those against? Councillor Buckles against. Declare it carried. Back to the substantive. Are there any comments in relation to the substantive? I did just want to ask a question that was raised by Amanda Hicks in relation to approved subject to the noise complaint being resolved, and I just wanted to get some commentary from the Director in relation to that question.
Through you, Mayor Cole. This application is separate to the Blue Flamingo proposal, or the Blue Flamingo development, which is the source of the concern for the adjoining resident or the nearby resident. This issue is completely separate to the noise complaints that have been raised. This application is proposing an amendment to the operating hours from 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. on Friday and Saturday night for the first floor area upstairs only. The existing concerns regarding noise are a separate matter to this application and need to be treated as such.
Thank you, Director. I would also just like to comment that in relation to the ongoing noise complaints in relation to the Blue Flamingo, the City of Vincent will continue to work with Amanda Hicks on those matters and is continuing to do so. So that won't impact on the level of assistance being provided there to resolve that particular issue. That will still continue. Are there any further comments in relation to the substantive? I'll put it. All those in favour of the substantive motion? Declare it carried unanimously. We'll now move on to item 9.11, which is the relocation of the Leederville Town Centre taxi zone, moved by Councillor Toppelberg, seconded by Councillor Loden. Go ahead.
Thank you. This is something that, in part, has taken way too long to come here. I think I just could never understand, from the time it was first discussed, I could never understand why the centrepiece of the Leederville Town Centre was effectively a car park or a row of parade of vehicles that were by nature temporary, whilst it's essential to provide, or has been up until a point, essential to provide taxi services. Its location always seemed odd to me. When I originally brought the notice of motion, there was some commentary provided by the administration which suggested that it related it somehow to rideshare. It had nothing to do with it. It was about taxis being in the centre of the town centre, and not even so much the behaviour of the taxis, just that it was just prime land that could either, if it was to be used for vehicles, could be used for car parking for patrons and visitors, but primarily should have been for people to enjoy the town centre. So happy to see it here. I will ask the question perhaps to the Director of Development Services that was raised from the floor. So there was the question asked in relation to the alfresco. I know we discussed it at the workshop, and I'll make some comments shortly, but the question was asked about why it's not an area that the City takes over as a hosted parklet or something similar, and why it's proposed that the area would be made available to the adjoining business to be able to operate as alfresco for the trial period.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the simple answer is the City has not budgeted funds to construct a parklet in that location. If the Leederville Hotel wishes to apply to construct a parklet or some kind of alfresco space in that area, then that's something the City is willing to consider, provided that the space is made available to the general public and is not restricted for the hotel's use. So that's a fundamental condition that's included in the recommendation for Council, that it be made available for the general public and not just for the hotel.
Just a further question. If Council was of a view to redirect funds from elsewhere to be able to host, create and host a parklet in that location, what would be the limitations, if any, in terms of food service or otherwise, or restrictions in terms of our insurance? Would we be able to set up a space where people would be able to freely enjoy with food service and be covered with our insurances?
Through the Mayor, yes, we could create a parklet in that space, and the activities that occur in that space would be covered by the city's insurance, provided we advised our insurer of that change. So that option is open to council, but I think the Director of Corporate Services might want to provide a comment in relation to the changes to the budget. I can, if you'd like.
I'm happy with that because I know that that's of our free will if we get enough hands in the air, so I appreciate that. Yeah, so the final question is that clause 1.3, there's nothing restricting us from at a later date, whether it be next council meeting or otherwise. This is not actually assigning that space to any operator or otherwise. It's just indicating that for a trial period we support in principle it being used for publicly available alfresco. Is that correct?
Through the Mayor, that's correct, and it's just for the trial period. Council will have another opportunity at the end of this trial period early next year to consider the results and a more permanent solution as part of next year's budget as to whether something should be constructed that's in that space, taxi rank should be relocated elsewhere, etc.
So just very brief comments. For me, when we discussed this, and the reason why I understand the recommendation has come to Council as it has, when this was discussed, we looked at potentially providing, for that very reason, that there was no budget to deal with the space in the current year. We did look at the idea of providing it as short-term parking or otherwise, which we do understand is needed within the Leederville Town Centre, but for me the principle remains the same as why I look to remove the taxi rank, and that is that it, unlike our other town centres, which are effectively strip shopping, if you take Beaufort Street or William Street or Scarborough Beach Road, Fitzgerald and Angove has some sense of intersection or otherwise, but really this is the only town centre we have where you actually have that natural space that actually has a large intersection that is pedestrian friendly, and to me the idea of turning that over to vehicles for parking short term or otherwise is not in the best long term interest. So I support the officer recommendation. I think that I'm happy to work together with the Leederville community to be able to come up with something that is agreeable to as many parties as possible for what to do with the space whilst we're assessing it. But I think the worst case scenario would be to just have it empty and just to have vehicles parking in there. And I've got no interest in turning it over to one business for their sole use. So I think something I absolutely support it being a publicly accessible space.
I also support the officer recommendation. I think this is a good result for the Leederville Town Centre. We're moving the mechanisms by which people get to and from the town centre to the periphery, but still a safe distance for people to access it, so it removes those vehicles from the town centre. It reduces those risks that are associated with people walking around, particularly late at night. And then we've got this great opportunity to create a space in the Leederville Town Centre once we figure out what we want to do with it as well. And we've also been able to create an Acroyd Bay right in the middle of the town centre as well, which I think is a great result. So, yeah.
Councillor Harley.
Through you, Chair. I support the the officer's recommendations and the alternative locations. As Councillor Topberg said, it has taken quite a while to get to this point, but we're here, which is a positive thing. I just want to make some comments, though. Having observed that area for a very long time at various times of the night, while I think this is going to go some way, to resolving some of the issues that are occurring because the taxis won't have a reason for being able to park there and line up to get parking, there's another emerging issue there, which is the cars just stopping in the middle of the road to pick people up. We've got Uber, we've got Daimaru, we've got obviously Uber Eats as well as the cars, and we've got another car share, a pickup service as well operating. So we've got an emerging problem in that area because it's obviously very popular. A lot of people go there. A lot of food services now are offering takeaway meals and people on home delivery, etc. So I think we need to think of some longer term monitoring that we need to do in this area because Leederville's just at the very starting point of being too popular for its own good. And I've been there on some nights when Oxford Street and Newcastle Street have been completely at a standstill, where buses haven't been able to turn and where there's people yelling and people. It's been really ugly, actually, and where taxi drivers and other drivers picking up food just park on the pavement, in the bus zones, in the loading zones. One night, a guy just stopped in the middle of the road and just ran across to pick his food up. He was a Damaroo driver. So, a Deliveroo, is it? So I don't use those services, right? I don't like giving my credit card to them. But anyway, so that's an emerging problem in Leederville as more and more hospitality places become popular. And I just would like the administration to stay very mindful of that area. It is an absolute jewel in the crown of our city. It is a place that other cities, not just in WA, but in other places, come to and try and replicate the X factor that Leederville has. It's not always pretty, I must say, but it does have an X factor, and it's at risk at the moment, I think, of all of that being damaged. So I just urge the administration to stay very vigilant in regards to Leederville, knowing that this will go some way towards assisting but will not fix what we now have as an emerging problem. And I'll just keep sending in photos if you guys aren't there.
Councillors? I'll make some comments. I do think that we are attempting here to stay ahead of the game and to recognise that the prevalence of the taxi is no longer, and that rideshare is now requiring a different approach, and that this actually serves to try to remove the taxi rank from the centre of the town centre, where not only is it causing ramping and bad behaviour, but really that's a place where a lot of people are crossing the street between businesses. It's a really vibrant part of the town centre, and I think that this is a much better temporary use while we consult with the community about what to do with it on a permanent basis. So not only are we relocating the taxi rank up the road, we're also looking at having pick-up and drop-off spots throughout the town centre, so that rideshare works more effectively and potentially deals with some of those other issues around food services as well, in terms of the Deliveroos and Uber Eats of the world. So I do think that this is an attempt to modernise the approach to taxis and rideshare, and I think that the new location of the taxi rank is a good one. It's in the purview of the new CCTV cameras. We recently did put in place 33 new high-definition CCTV cameras in the Leederville town centre, with assistance from our state government counterparts, and that also will make a difference, I feel, to some of the behaviours that Councillor Harley is describing. So as a short-term measure, and as mentioned, the existing taxi rank will serve to be an alfresco area, but not for the exclusive use of one trader, but to be a shed amongst traders. So that will all go out for consultation. There will be a survey of the community and the existing businesses in Leederville, and that will have quite a significant radius. So it will go out to a lot of people, and there will be some extensive consultation on a more permanent solution there. So look, I'm happy to support the officer recommendation. I think this is a good holding pattern while we survey our community on what we do with that in the longer term. Are there any further comments? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? I declare it carried unanimously. We're now moving on to item 9.2, which is number 562 Charles Street, North Perth, proposed construction of 5 multiple dwellings. Do I have a mover for this item? Councillor Buckles. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. This seems like a fairly straightforward approval to me, so I've not got much to say on it and happy to support it. Thank you.
Councillor Loden.
I'm also happy to support the approval. It's very straightforward. Thank you.
I will just ask, there were some items raised from the public gallery by the applicant in relation to some of the reporting around plot ratio, solar access, open space and privacy, and would just like to ask the Director if you'd like to respond to any of those comments raised.
Yes, through you, Mayor. In relation to the plot ratio, the reason the applicant is has calculated the plot ratio to be different is because the city has excluded the road widening area. And so that does change. It's a significant area and it does change the plot ratio. However, given the design of the proposal, administration is recommending approval for the plot ratio and considers it meets the design elements, the design principles of the R codes. In relation to the open space, there is a slight variation for open space, and so it does require the discretion of council. However, there are two areas in the report which relate to privacy and solar access. So the boxes were ticked for requiring the discretion of council, when in fact both of those variations were removed with amended plans. So I apologise for that error. Those boxes shouldn't be ticked, as there's no those aspects of the application are deemed to comply.
Thank you for correcting the record there, Director. Just some comments. My main concern was whether the landscaping calculations included the road widening area and whether the green wall was counted towards landscaping. I've been advised since the council briefing that that's not the case. I've been satisfied in relation to landscaping and I'm happy to support the officer recommendation. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Declare it carried unanimously. We're now moving on to item 9.7, which is number 82 to 92 Parry Street, Perth. Proposed change of use from showroom and office to place of public worship and office. Do I have a mover for this item? Councillor Loden, seconded Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm supportive of the officer recommendation in this case. I know a number of concerns have been raised from the gallery around unsavoury characters and the availability of parking as well. But the information we've been provided back is that there is going to be CCTV and security guard available on site, and that there is quite extensive parking in Parry Street. I did want to ask a question, though, through to the Director around the query raised from the floor about whether or not Parry Street was consulted on this development.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I might pass to the Manager of Approval Services to answer the questions in relation to this application.
Through the Mayor, the consultation was undertaken for landowners and occupiers between Pierce Street and Newcastle Street along that section. If you refer to attachment 1, it does identify the full area of consultation that was undertaken as part of this application.
Excuse me, Manager, would you just be able to say what number, page number, so that council members can refer to that?
Through the Mayor, page 239 of the agenda.
Thank you. Councillor Loden, do you wish to add anything further? Councillor Toppelberg?
Just very quickly, a couple of things. So the property is zoned commercial. I think that whilst there's no question there'll be an impact on Sunday mornings in terms of there being a change to the experience of living around that property, I think that as far as uses go, it's relatively low-key compared to some of the impact of some uses potentially under the zoning table for what would be available in a commercial property. But I also do note in relation to car parking queries about permits, if it does become an issue to the point where it is impacting on the amenity of surrounding owners, we do have the ability to place parking restrictions and have done so successfully in areas that specifically target the problem times or otherwise. And so that's something, in that circumstance, residents are entitled to, where there are parking restrictions, they are entitled to permits. So that doesn't make it resident-only parking or it guarantees somebody a parking space, but in the event, and I understand there are already restrictions in that part of Parry Street, which means you would be entitled to you would be entitled to permits, but if those restrictions were extended to Sunday mornings or otherwise, that those permits would enable residents and their visitors to park within those times. So I think that there are appropriate measures in place to deal with that potential. This is vastly different to the previous application that we had for a similar use within a residential zone, both in terms of the zoning of the property and the nature of the surrounding properties that we previously had in Leederville, and I'm comfortable with the officer recommendation.
Councillor Harley?
Was the second... were you going to speak? Oh,
No,
beg your pardon, sorry.
they've both
Beg your pardon,
spoken.
sorry. I share many of the views that Councillor Topelberg just made. Most people know I don't go to church. I don't think that's a secret, but I have been to churches like this before, and I would not say that these types of churches attract unsavoury people at all. There are some very unsavoury people in that area. They belong to the 4 or so brothels that are in operation, and maybe the presence of a church will have a positive influence on people walking through that area, perhaps. They should do night services. I think that there is a legitimate concern about parking, but I think that Councillor Topelberg has identified that there are mechanisms that we can use. I see this as something that is a different type of application to the one we dealt with on Oxford Street, which was very heavily residential and which would have dominated the parking because of the numbers involved. I don't believe this has the same issues with it. So on that basis, I'm going to be supporting it.
Councillor Hallett.
Can I just ask a question? Through the Mayor to the Director of Community Engagement, I guess, in terms of parking. Could you just, I guess, give some comments around the parameters for monitoring whether or not extensions of restrictions might be applied to that area and then subsequent permits being provided?
Through you, Mayor Cole, from a ranger's perspective, when new restrictions are put in place or there is a change of use, rangers do generally patrol the area and provide information to technical services or development services as the basis for taking more of a planned approach to parking restrictions, i.e. measuring occupancy or dedicated surveys. So the rangers won't necessarily survey the car parking, but will certainly give on-the-ground observations back to relevant officers within the city to initiate some more formal surveying, which is then the basis for whether it be temporary or permanent parking restrictions. So rangers will continue to patrol this area if indeed this application is approved, and that is then the basis for the consideration of any parking impacts and whether there's some more formalised surveying required.
Councillors? Look, I'll just add to the comments already made that I do think that the balance has been achieved here. I would just like to flag, bring forward the other factor is that this is a 5-year time-limited approval. It's not a permanent approval. So I think that a lot of lessons were learned in the application that Councillor Harley has referred to, and that I think that that approach with a really strong management plan and looking at whether an area can sustain a use like this now and for the future, and where that line and that transition may change and may no longer make it a compatible use. So when I read this report, I really felt that the staff had grappled with those issues previously, and that really came to light through this report, and I was very comfortable with the fact that through the 5-year approval, the management plan, checking things like CCTV, having a security guard on site, having people directing traffic to park in certain areas. I think that this is a pretty stringent management plan, and so on that basis, and also given the issues discussed around the ability for restrictions on Sunday, if the parking becomes at a point where residents are no longer able to get a park in their immediate area, I'm comfortable to support this application. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Now moving on to item 9.5, which is number 44, Cadena Street, North Perth, proposed outbuilding to a single house. Councillor Toppelberg moving, Councillor Loden seconding.
I don't really have much to say about the proposal other than I'm supportive of the officer recommendation. I think that I don't think that it's trivial to have from a neighbour's perspective in terms of the potential impact of height of a building over and above the fence height. I think that is something that can be a potential issue, but I'm supportive of the officer recommendation, and I, whilst it's for another forum, also can't explain why it's been sitting in a council for 8 months to get to here, but appreciate the frustrations, and some of those issues could easily have been resolved a lot sooner, but we'll get a decision tonight.
Also support the officer recommendation. I guess it is definitely a disappointment that it's taken so long to get to this point. We are doing work to improve how these approval processes go, and so they move quicker and people get certainty sooner, but that doesn't do anything for the applicant in this case. It still has taken a very long time. So it is an issue that we're aware of, and the development services team are doing a lot of work to address that at this point in time too.
Councillors? Also, just to say to the applicant, I'm glad that you persevered and that you have made it to the meeting tonight, and we've heard from you and your frustrations, and they've been noted, and we do apologise for the frustrations that you've experienced. But I think that this is something that I'm very happy to support. I note that you've had some issues along the way and some concerns over commercial use, etc. That's unfortunate, and I hope that you will enjoy your shed and that you can rebuild some of the relationships with your neighbours. So are there any further comments? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? I declare it carried. Okay, we're now moving on to item 9.3, which is number 2, Coogee Street, Mount Hawthorn, proposed change of use from shop residential to local shop eating house, including alterations and additions, and this is an amendment to the existing approval. Do I have a mover for this item? Councillor Harley. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Buckles.
Thank you, through you, Chair, and thank you for everyone who has an interest in this matter coming to Council, and also the briefing that occurred last week. And thank you for undertaking that in a respectful way. It's always good to have. I am going to be speaking in favour of the officer approval. For those that have been following this, when this last came to Council, I was in favour of an increased number at that time. Since that time, what I've seen happen through the reports, there's obviously acoustic reports, there's been parking reports. I know there's been quite a lot of interaction with the cafe and the administration in regards to delivery times, a whole range of matters. And I also am aware that there were a number of people who, in the first instance, were not supportive of this cafe. I've spoken to a number of people that have changed their minds and are now customers of that cafe, which is a positive thing. I also acknowledge there are people who didn't support it at the time and still don't. I just want to, I guess, make a comment in regards to what it is I, as a councillor, take into account when something like this comes before us. So, yes, of course, we do need to make evidence-based decisions, and this is where parking studies, noise assessments and a whole range of other things can assist us. We also have to use our local knowledge. That's what we're here to do as councillors, our own observations, and ultimately I draw all of that together, and I make what I believe is the best decision with all the information in front of me tonight. And I feel very comfortable with approving what is before us from the officer recommendation perspective. I just want to touch on parking again, because I do believe it's important. It's been an issue at each debate. The parking studies show a significant amount of parking at all various hours. They are it is not at risk at this point, and I don't think for a very long time, of being parked out. It is unrestricted, untimed and free parking. That parking is open to anyone, visitors, people using the sports field, commuters, if that's what they wish to do, to use that parking at any point, to come and go and to park for as long as they wish to. The Jadaxo, I'm so sorry, I can never get the name right. The cafe patrons are not the only users of that. My own observations, and I've spent many hours observing the cafe at different times actually, and watching people come and go, and yes, of course, people drive there, but I have seen a majority of families, children, dog walkers, kids in school uniforms. I've seen local people whose faces I recognise. I'm not saying it's a purely local cafe, but I do believe that it is providing a service and amenity for people who may not wish to go up to the Strip. They may not wish to go up to Oxford Street. That part of Anzac Road, the report says it's been there since 1986. It hasn't. That deli's been around, and another set of shops, two sets of shops further down on Anzac Road, another corner deli, and then another small set of shops, which I think now has a hairdresser and a couple of other businesses. I think about since the 1930s. I certainly visited this when it was a delicatessen when I was about 10 years of age. So it became a very run-down little deli, and I and many other people just hoped for the day when another business was going to move in there and turn it into a place where we wanted to go. And that, for me, is what I saw happen when this application came before council. So I applaud the business owners for creating a small business where I have seen elderly residents from the local retirement village, where I've seen family members and young children going there. I think it is a place where community comes together, and I always applaud that in a small business. So I wish you well with your application tonight, and I will let anyone else speak who wishes to.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm not going to be quite so complimentary to the business owner, although I may well still approve it in the end. Look, this application annoys me in that ultimately I feel that we've been hoodwinked into approving something that was constructed far, far, far larger than its approval. It was given an approval when there was opposition at the time, and I think Council resolved to enable a small, almost hole-in-the-wall type set-up, 15 people, and determined that that would be an appropriate size for this location in a residential setting. Again, you know, seeing the hierarchy of our town centres and local strips on Oxford Street and Scarborough Beach Road, we often don't encourage doctors to set up in residential areas, and I think we are slightly more forgiving in terms of this sort of intrusion into residential areas. But certainly my experience of, I've been to Jaxo, and they make some good stuff, and it's quite a nice place to visit. But I must admit, when I go in there, I do feel, and this place could be huge, and it clearly has been built to be huge. And then you're in a position as a councillor where to say no to approving to 40, which in itself isn't massive. Is it 35, 40? I can't remember the exact number.
Just to clarify, Councillor Buckles, it's 35,
it's 35
that we're dealing with tonight.
Yeah, sorry, 35, yeah, tonight. But it could be, it just seems that the expectation was always that this was going to be a much larger cafe, and I'm not convinced that Council necessarily would have supported a larger cafe at the time of approval. That said, it's quite a nice cafe, and I think it's not an unpleasant place to go, but I can see that it mightn't be a pleasant place to live opposite or close to in terms of residential amenity. And I'm going to listen to other councillors' input before determining my final opinion. Thank you.
Councillors. Councillor Loden.
I'll move the Mayor's amendment to this on the purple.
Do I have a seconder for the amendment on the purple? Seconded, Councillor Buckles.
Thank you. So this amendment effectively removes the outdoor eating area, which is the part of the development on the actual street front. This makes a lot of sense to me. This is not, like people have previously said, Scarborough Beach Road or on Oxford Street. We're not looking to activate the street front and so forth. It is also, as Councillor Buckles pointed out, quite a large site. There is ample room for them to incorporate 35 people within the existing site. So it seems entirely appropriate to remove that outdoor eating area, which then also speaks towards the issues around noise that people have raised previously as well.
Councillor Buckles, do you wish to speak? Does anyone wish to speak to the amendment? Councillor Harley?
I have a question, Mayor. If this was to be supported, I just want to clarify, so this would be, at this point in time, not allowing any alfresco at the front of the property, and so in future, if the business wanted to apply for that area to be alfresco, would they be able to make a new application to have that considered, or would this amendment mean there can be no alfresco, full stop?
My understanding is the latter, but I will hand over to the Director or to the Manager of Approval Services for a fuller answer.
Through the Mayor, they would need to lodge an application to amend that condition from this approval if they wanted to operate or have an alfresco within the verge space.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to speak against the amendment. I just don't support placing a restriction on alfresco at a time when this city is working hard to reduce red tape and to provide activation. It has, while I understand it was a different type of business, alfresco was in place there. Obviously, this is a different type of use with coffees, etc. But I just don't think that we are. I won't speak for obviously won't speak for the rest of the council. This is just not what I believe that the City of Vincent should be doing. I believe that there's an alfresco area. It was that previously. We're talking about some people sitting at the front having coffee. I'm obviously open to amending the times when that can be open, but to have this as a full stop, that's it. You, like every other business can apply for alfresco, but this one can't, I don't believe is in the spirit of what we've been trying to achieve in the City of Vincent, and not something I'd support.
Councillors? Councillor Murphy?
Yes, I just agree with Councillor Harley there. I think it's it wouldn't be suitable, or in my view, it's not fair for us to be offering free alfresco areas for other cafe similar businesses across the city and exclude these people. So, yeah, I won't be supporting the amendment.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. I wasn't going to speak on the amendment, but we're going to talk about fairness. This is a residential R30 zone property. The only Councillor Buckles talked before about being potentially hoodwinked into something. I think that this is just being completely complicit. If we were, I'll speak more when we get back to the substantive. But this is not a restriction on a business that once enjoyed something that we're taking away from them. This is absolutely a commentary on the nature of the zoning, the nature of the area, and it's not a couple of people enjoying coffees. It's a full-service cafe smack in the middle of a residential area, and I disagree entirely that they are somehow owed rights to having alfresco, given the nature of the property and its proximity to neighbours and some of the clear issues that are there. But I'll speak more when we get back to the substantive.
Councillor Hallett.
Can I just ask a question to Director of Development Services, through you, Mayor? Would this also, obviously it then prevents alfresco dining out there. Does it also prevent the council in, activating, for the want of the better word, that area with extra greenery or other infrastructure that might help with the sound that crosses over the road for the residents there?
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, it would not restrict the city from undertaking any works in the verge.
Councillors? I'll speak to the amendment. The reason that I propose this amendment is that when I was reading through the acoustic report, I just noted that the report talked about decibels, and it talked about the fact that up to 35 patrons can be on site in the on-site alfresco area, and that is what the proposed motion puts to us, that 35, if council so chooses to approve a 35 patron number, that those 35 could actually be in the on-site alfresco area in their entirety. It's probably unlikely, but it would be permitted, and that would produce decibels of between 25 to 47, while 6 patrons curbside alfresco would produce decibels of 22 to 43. So on the basis that the sound emitted from both alfresco areas with such vastly different numbers was relatively similar, and given that I've gone to this particular attachment, which is around the noise-affected premises which were identified in the acoustic report, which are 8 premises, I do think that not having use of that alfresco area will have an impact on noise levels. The existing indoor and outdoor alfresco areas are quite vast and can easily accommodate up to 35 patrons if council so wishes to approve that. So in the interests of further noise reduction strategy, I felt that this amendment would go some way to deal with the concerns raised by particularly those residents in potentially noise-affected premises that have lodged an objection and that reside quite closely to that curbside alfresco area. Are there any further comments on the amendment? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? All those against? Councillor Murphy and Councillor Harley against. I declare the amendment carried. So we're back to the substantive. Councillor Toppelberg.
I'll move the amendment that's on the yellow, which I'll read it out because I don't know that it's been communicated previously other than to elected members. The approval is personal to the business operator, the trustee for the Uma Vita Trust trading as Ajaxo, and is not transferable or assignable to any other person or entity. The approved eating house shall only be operated by the trustee for the Uma Vita Trust trading as Ajaxo. This approval shall lapse and cease to remain valid upon any change in operator of the eating house. And I will talk to it if I get a seconder.
Councillor Loden seconding.
Thank you. So whilst that is it is extremely restrictive in terms of the potential to sell or to transfer operation of the business, I would imagine if the business continues to operate and then is to be sold or to continue to be maintained in the same way, the DA would come in and that would go through a simple process and the management plan would remain. But under our town planning scheme, the use that is proposed, or the proposed use, which is there, if eating house, there's literally nothing stopping the golden arches appearing from out the front there. There's no difference between those, and I've used that as an example, but essentially what this does is ties this application to this business, which I think for those who are of a mind to approve it is the nature of what's being sold or proposed, and I think it's appropriate given the location to put a restriction on it such that if that was to change or the applicant wanted to change that, sell it, pass on or assign the business or the lease, then they would need to make an application to council to be able to do so.
Excuse me, we just have to have a clarification from the CEO on the numbering of the numbering of the condition.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Council members and also Director of Development Services, just for the avoidance of doubt, the preamble to this recommendation refers to a new recommendation 5 being inserted. In relation to this item, I think it might need to refer to a new condition 6 rather than a new recommendation 5. Could I just get the Director of Development Services through you, Mayor Cole, to confirm that?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, it should say condition, but it should be 5 because the existing current number 5 should be the last condition. So instead of recommendation, it should say that a new condition 5 be inserted as follows, and the remaining condition be renumbered.
I'll go back to the mover of the amendment. Are you happy to accept that change? Okay, and the seconder? Thank you. Proceed.
Just that I support the proposed amendment.
Any further comments in relation to this? Councillor Harley.
Thank you, Chair. I don't support the amendment. I find this incredibly restrictive, and I'm trying to. And I get the strike into our hearts in regards to the Golden Arches, but I think it is so far at the end of an example. Anyway, so this is an eating house. This is what we're approving. The application before us is to extend the seating. This was not something anyone sought to put on the original development application when it came before us. I think that this is a clause which is being, if this passes, is being well and truly done in a retrospective way to business owners, and I don't agree with this level of restriction, that if this company chose to keep every single thing the same, right down to the chairs, and just changed owners, that they would have to come back to council, that all of this falls away, all of several years worth of applications, etc., falls away because they've changed owners. I don't accept that. I understand that if there was a new proposition for that to become something else, of course it would have to come back to council. If there was an increase in seats, it would have to come back. If there was a change of use that changed it from being an eating house, absolutely, I support that. But the way that this is worded, it can't be operated by even another entity. It is specific to the trustee for the Uma Vida Trust. Trading as DeJaxo, I think, is unnecessarily restrictive.
Councillor Buckles.
Thank you, Mayor. I've just got a quick question to the Director. I just wanted to find out if there was sale to another entity, do the conditions of this application still apply to that entity in terms of management plan and hours of operation and the like? So even if they were to change from to more of a restaurant focus than a cafe, would do those restrictions still hold?
Through the Mayor, yes, the conditions would apply if the landowner changed or the operator changed, because the approval runs with the land. It should be pointed out that this condition 5 only applies to this amendment, so it only applies to the additional 20 persons. So the existing approval for a 15-person cafe and the shop continue to apply and could change operator. This condition is just proposing to restrict the additional 20 persons to JAXO.
Yeah, so just following off from that, I must admit I don't support the amendment either. I think that we, as a council, want to get the operating conditions correct now, and if they sell it to someone, I don't think that is actually of concern to council.
Look, I also don't support the amendment. I think that council needs to take a position on what is an appropriate number of patrons to have at this location. I think that whether this is sold on to another eating house is not the issue. The idea of the Golden Arches coming in is just not something that would ever be countenanced in a residential area. I think that the reality is that if this business sold, you'd be looking at a shop and eating house of a similar nature to what's existing. It might be a different approach. It might be slightly more hipster, who knows, but it's literally going to be a shop and an eating house, and I feel very strongly that the decision before council tonight is whether the number of patrons is suitable for the area, not whether the existing provider or applicant is suitable to deliver on that 35, because this effectively would give approval to 35 and then simply remove it when there's a potential changeover, and I actually don't think that is the issue at hand tonight. So I won't support the amendment. Are there any further comments? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? All those against? Just declare it lost. Okay, we're back to did you... Back to the substantive. Are there councillors that haven't spoken that wish to talk to the substantive motion?
Yep, I will speak briefly. So my views on this have changed in the last little while, and it's been... I think we have a number of examples that people can point to where businesses such as this are extremely successful and where they exist harmoniously in their surroundings. We have a number of examples, and that's throughout the world, I suppose, and also within Vincent we also have a number of examples where there are where it does cause significant issue. I think that some of the nature, some of the issues or the concerns that people have, such as car parking, I think are manageable. I think that I do think that there is the capacity in terms of the car parking or otherwise, but I just don't. For me, the case hasn't been made to increase the numbers other than for I don't think that the community is crying out for more people to be able to be there. I think that other than for the sole benefit of the proprietor, and I will note also that it is, this is not, the nature of the proprietor or otherwise is not really of concern. I agree with the Mayor in relation to that. I disagree with the way in which we manage it. To me, this is an R30 area that had a corner deli there. This is not to do with the way in which Vincent encourages business, or is it's not an argument about red tape or otherwise. But if you can't make a go of it as a 15-person shop and eating house in a great location like that, which I think the council was very fair in approving, I have no issue or concern that somebody would be able to make a go of it. I just can't. If I put myself in the shoes of a landowner, and I understand the Anzac Road is a district distributor and it is something that connects effectively an area near a freeway exit through to Oxford Street, I think that it's clear to me about the location, it's clear to me about the opportunities, and I do completely accept the desire of some local people to have the business operating there. But the increase in patron numbers, whilst in reading the officer report, I do accept the arguments about the potential low impact in relation to things such as traffic and then the sound attenuation and otherwise. I don't think that it's conducive to what I would envisage as being life in an R30 zoned residential area. The property is an anomaly, and I know that there are some commercial properties in and around, but I look at some of the other examples where we've got this right and where we've got this wrong, and I think that the balance at the moment, despite opposition, this council relatively unanimous, or nearly unanimously from memory, approved the existence of the business, and I'm comfortable with it to continue in the same way. So I won't actually be supporting the increase in numbers.
Councillors, has everyone spoken? Okay, look, I do have some comments to make. In relation to the change of use to shop and eating house, that decision was made by Council back in December 2014. So the decision before Council tonight is quite specific. It's about an application to extend the number of patrons in the eating house, and the request from the applicant is to expand by 20 from 15 to 35. In terms of the previous time Council considered this, the majority of Council believed that the DA for an increase of 40 patrons was refused on the grounds of on-site car parking requirements not being met, increased patron numbers not being compatible with the surrounding residential land uses, the proposed maximum patron numbers adversely impacting the amenity of the residents on Anzac Road and Coogee Street by virtue of noise and parking. So there's a critical question that was asked at the council briefing last week. I can't remember whether it was Councillor Toppelberg or Councillor Loden. Councillor Toppelberg asked, so what is different this time? What is the difference? And for me, there are two critical differences. The first difference is that this is an evidence-based assessment with a level of detail and research that has not previously been put before this council. The assessment has shown through a traffic impact statement and occupancy survey that the maximum occupation was on a Sunday lunchtime, and that was 57%. This has also been verified by the City of Vincent, who did their own survey in response to the survey provided by the applicant. The second part of this is that there has now been a detailed acoustic report demonstrating how the operations of the shop and eating house can comply with the regulations subject to subject to those conditions that form part of the recommended motion, and which I had sought to further increase through the amendment which was adopted by Council and now forms part of the substantive motion. The second factor is that the recommendation for approval contains a stringent approach to noise management with a management plan, which is this is one of the new things that I believe our Director of Development Services, who is new to this is the first time that he has oversight of this particular site and this application. And what he has been bringing to these development applications are management plans which are reviewed by the city every 12 months. So it's not just a tick and flick exercise, it's not just you're approved and on your way and then we just deal with compliance. This is an ongoing management situation through a noise management plan which is rigorous and which will be reviewed by the city on an annual basis. I'd also just like to say, look, those two are the critical factors to me, and in my view, this goes towards satisfying the previous reasons for refusal, numbers 2 and 3, which was around residential amenity, because that was around car parking and noise, pretty much exclusively. We're no longer dealing with the land use issue because Council has already formed a decision on that basis. The reason 1 for refusal was, this is for the previous DA, was in relation to a lack of on-site car parking requirements. The condition now requires, of the proposed motion, requires the applicant to provide more bike parking and to provide cash in lieu. No cash in lieu discount, the full cash in lieu for the difference between from the additional proposed 20 patrons. I also would like to point out that the City of Vincent is going to be doing traffic management on Anzac Road, where we're actually line marking out parking bays and putting in speed humps. That work has been significantly delayed by the water court works which has been occurring down Anzac Road, but that is nearing completion and we will still soon be able to mark out those bays, which should help with some of those poor parking behaviours and perhaps difficulties with reversing out of car bays where sufficient space and truncation hasn't been allowed due to parking beyond where parking should be occurring. I do recognise that this application is more than 100% patron increase. I've heard a lot about 133%, and I believe that's the correct calculation. But I think that when you look at the small base in which this is coming from, it's 15 patrons. When you go inside the cafe, and I hope that all council members have had an opportunity to do so, it's clear that the cafe can comfortably and reasonably accommodate another 20 patrons inside the premises, inside the on-site alfresco, and that this is not going to be something that is spilling out, that is actually going to be quite contained, and it's still going to look quite potentially still look a bit sparse in there. But I think that the key issues is that if we can be satisfied that the noise and the parking can be accommodated under the existing conditions, I see no reason to refuse the 35 patrons. I would really like to see Council land on a number where we can actually move forward and that we can give some certainty to residents and to the applicant on this matter. So when I first came to this and read that there was a recommendation to approve 35, I went through a process. I read this very closely. I read the acoustic report in great detail. I asked a number of questions. I went through a thought pattern of perhaps we should approve to 25 and ask the applicant to come back 12 months later. But when I read the report again and I see that parking can be accommodated and that the noise issues can be met and that noise regulations can be met, I really see no reason to refuse. So on that basis, I will be supporting the officer recommendation. Are there any further comments? Okay, I'll put the substantive motion. All those in favour? Declare it, all those against? Declare it carried with Councillor Toppelberg voting against. We're now moving on to item 9.8, which is number 233 Charles Street, North Perth, proposed 5 group dwellings. Do I have a mover and seconder? Councillor Toppelberg moved. Councillor Loden seconded.
Thank you. Thank you to the Director for providing the plans that are actually been submitted. I just feel necessary to talk to this because, so I'm currently, after 7 years and 11 months in this chamber, putting my name up to be an elected member again, and I've been going through some of my campaign material, and I was asked at home just today, well, if you haven't been able to fix it in that time, why should you be back again? And I look at this development and think this is exactly why, because despite all of the work that we have done in our planning framework, in our policies...
Councillor Toppelberg, I do just have to caution you that you can't refer to the election in the council chamber.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. I have no issue with that. So, okay, that's understood. But look, the things that are... this is an example of the work that needs to be done in terms of our planning policies and our planning framework, and the reasons at the time when our current built form policy was approved, there was some conjecture from a couple of elected members about some of the issues that would be addressed and some of the issues that wouldn't be addressed. And I think what we have in this application highlights clearly some areas that we do need to address. We need to be able to get to some of the more fine-grained elements of planning to be able to ensure that we're getting better outcomes than what this proposes. That being said, it is pretty much compliant, and therefore I'll have no choice other than to vote in favour of it. But the reason that I raised it was in the same way that I did last week, because I think that we can do better in terms of the outcomes that we are getting from our DAs, and certainly where we're looking at something like this, which will likely go into multiple ownership and will therefore likely be within the city for many, many years to come.
Seconder, Councillor Loden doesn't wish to speak. Does anyone wish to comment further on this item?
Thank you. I do, Mayor. I just on page 275, it's recommended that Council adopt the officer recommendation to introduce a new design review panel terms of reference. I'm just moving to that. So recommendation 1 adopts the draft terms of reference. I just do wish to raise issue in regards to the terms of reference again, which is the lack of what I feel is the lack of transparency for council members. I beg your pardon?
Sorry, Councillor Harley, I was just about to correct you. We're still dealing with a DA here. We're dealing with 9.8. So we haven't quite got
My apologies, I thought we were on the DAX.
I thought that you were going to then comment on the DAX response to this applicant, so I was letting you run for a while there. But
I've got the wrong page number altogether.
That's fine, no problem at all.
Oh, that was the wrong item.
That item has been moved on block.
Yeah,
Councillor Harley.
Yes, thank you.
You won't get an opportunity to speak on that one, I'm afraid.
No, that's fine. I'll put my comments in.
Thank you. Yeah. Councillor Murphy, did you wish to speak?
I should have.
No, okay. Any further comment? Okay, I'll put 9.8. All those in favour? I declare it carried. We now move on to item 9.10, which is the Fencing Local Law 2008 review. Councillor Murphy, I believe you raised this. Would you like to move this item? Do I have a seconder? Councillor Buckles.
Yeah, look, I just had a question through the chair. I wanted to know what the process would be if two consenting neighbours wish to build a fence lower than 1.8 metres, and would this be possible, and would it require council approval under this new policy?
Yes.
Through the Mayor, currently, I'm not going to answer currently. The proposal is for two consenting neighbours to be able to build a shorter fence than 1.8 without the city's approval.
It's just that it mentions that it's to a minimum of 1.8 in the... Yeah. So that wouldn't apply?
So through the Mayor, currently it's to a minimum of 1.8, and therefore anyone who wanted to build a fence less than 1.8 would need approval of the city. The proposal is for a sufficient fence to be defined as a fence that is 1.8 metres high. So if two neighbours don't agree, then a 1.8 metre fence can still be constructed, So anyone can build a 1.8 metre high fence. They don't need approval from the city. They don't need approval from their neighbour. If they want to construct a fence that's lower or higher, they have two choices. One is they can agree with their neighbour, and the other option is that they can apply for approval from the city.
Thank you. Well, look, I'm happy. Yeah, I'm happy with this motion. I support it. I think it's a good example of the council cutting red tape, and you know, as long as that the neighbours have permission, I don't, you know, consent. I don't see any issues with this at all. Thanks.
Seconder, Councillor Buckles, do you wish to speak? Does anyone else wish to speak? Okay, I'll put the item on local fencing law. All those in favour? Declare it carried unanimously. We're now moving on to item 10.5, which is tender number 539 of 17, supply and laying of hot mixed asphalt. Councillor Loden, do you wish to move this item? Do I have a seconder? Councillor Buckles.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess the main reason I raised this one was because we didn't have an opportunity to ask any questions during the briefing because it was a late item. I just wanted to, through the chair, ask to the acting director. To my analysis, there's a comparison between Asphatec and Rhodes 2000. The Rhodes 2000 is slightly cheaper, but it doesn't perform as well on quality or OHS compliance. I wanted to ask if that cost saving that you would see with Rhodes 2000, was there a comparison done with that versus the reduction in quality, and what are the consequences of that? So they have a better quality management system, say. So is there a risk associated with having worse roads or roads that need to be repaired sooner? Yeah.
Through you, Mayor Cole, look, this is obviously not my field of expertise. I would have to seek some form of clarification from the engineering officers to answer that question clearly and concisely, I'm afraid.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm just quickly scanning some of the confidential attachments in case council members haven't already identified the actual quantum of the cost saving. From memory, is not significant at all. We're only talking about tens of thousands of dollars, or less than 20 in fact. And my understanding from speaking with one of the officers that was on the evaluation panel in respect of this item last week was that it was considered that because the cost saving was so marginal and the higher scoring of the preferred contractor was greater than that of the second ranked contractor, that on that basis the evaluation panel considered that it was going to, or that the preferred contractor was going to provide the most advantageous outcome for the city. Having said that, the comment was also raised by that officer that if the price differential was more substantial, then the equation and the assessment of the evaluation panel may well have been different.
Thank you, CEO. I guess my main thing was to make sure that we're actually thinking about it in that context. I'm happy to support the officer recommendation. I think they got the answer right. That price differential is, as you say, it's 1.7% difference in price, so it's not significant. And it's very difficult to quantify what that better quality and better OHS compliance would result in, and you wouldn't want to be seeing any risk associated with a safety issue or having roads that fall apart sooner than they should, because that's going to cause future headaches for future councils. So.
Any further comments in relation to this tender? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare it carried. Moving on now to item 11.5. This is Standing Orders Amendment, Local Law 2017.
Excuse me, Chair.
Sorry?
Is it 11.1?
11. we're raising this in the order of council requests, so I've been advised by the CEO that in following that order, 11.5 is next. I know it frustrates you, but now that I've already read it out, we're going with it. So stick with me, people. So do I have a mover for item 11.5, Standing Orders Amendment Local Law? Moved Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Buckles.
I'm just going to ask a question through you to the CEO. We currently have, and I'm quite happy to just, if the answer is just to sit here and take it, that's fine, but where people, is there provision in the standing orders for, and I know that, on occasion the presiding member will call, either provide a response or call on you or an officer to provide a response, but where issues are raised, where issues are raised that are not items on the agenda and therefore elected members don't get a chance to speak to them, but issues are raised from the gallery that perhaps hang out there as either questions on notice or just comments or otherwise, is there provision within the standing orders to be able to provide an opportunity for a response either by elected members, or is that something that can be asked of the presiding member at the time if somebody wishes to respond to comments made?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm happy to consult the standing orders more closely, but I don't believe there is any prohibition in the standing orders that prevents the presiding member from calling on any member of administration who's present in the chamber or council member to provide a comment or response to those issues. My recollection is that the default provision under the standing orders states that where the question cannot be addressed or responded to, then it will be taken on notice. But I'm happy to look at that a little more closely. But my view is that in the absence of any specific prohibition in respect of that issue, then the presiding member does have discretion to determine the rules that apply.
And does that include elected members being able to ask the presiding member for permission to respond if they so choose to do?
Through you, Mayor Cole, as I mentioned, my view would be that it's most appropriate in the context of what I've just mentioned for the presiding member to determine or invite relevant staff or council members to provide a response or comment should the presiding member think that's appropriate.
Just to add that when questions are asked from the public gallery, I often do ask the CEO if he wishes to respond. Perhaps, I mean, I could do it over the microphone, but I often do turn to, usually when questions are asked, I do give him the opportunity to respond, and that conversation does occur. But yes, I mean, council members are entitled to make personal explanations, but I don't know that that would particularly cover what you're speaking about. Are there any further comments, Councillor Toppelberg? No, any further comments on this item? Seconder? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare it carried. We'll now go to item 11.6, which is the review of Policy 4.2.4, Council Meetings Recording and Web Streaming. Councillor Hallett, do you wish to move this item? Seconder? Councillor Harley.
Thank you, Chair. The web streaming of meetings and archiving those with bookmarks is really just a natural extension of our current web streaming policy and part of our transparency agenda that Vincent continues to lead in WA. Web streaming of meetings provides an opportunity for greater engagement with the community, giving greater access to those with mobility or other commitments that affect their ability to attend the public gallery in person. It also increases the visibility of council business and enhances community awareness of the purpose, role and operation of council meetings. And that can only increase by extending the availability of archived video so that community members are not limited by their availability to watch live only at the time our meetings are held. Just to note that research from the Institute for Public Policy and Governance at UTS has found that councils are held in higher regard when people have more exposure to what their councils actually do. So in a time of falling interest and regard for our democracy and democratic institutions, this is a great way to try to address that in some way.
Thank you, Councillor Hallett. Sorry, the seconder, was it you, Councillor Buckles? No, Councillor Harley, apologies.
I am obviously supportive and have been supportive, but I have taken a little bit of time to warm up to some aspects of this because I still have some concerns about we're not covered under parliamentary privilege, and perhaps that's going to lead to better behaviour. Perhaps that's going to lead to more considered views being expressed, so that's a very positive thing. And I, for one, would still like to have a once-a-year get-together for everyone who sits at home and watches the live stream, and I think it could be quite interesting. I am actually very interested in the stats behind this, so I'm very interested to know whether we can get any more sophisticated stats in regards to not who, obviously, but where and how wide this is going. There's certainly been a certain council in Queensland whose live council meetings have been watched by many, many people. This has been subject of some news recently. So I think there is interest much further than our city. I personally would not do it, but I may one night if I'm sick and when I'm no longer on council and want to watch my friends and councillor colleagues debate an item. So I think if there's more of this to evolve, I think it would be a really good thing to bring back to a workshop to keep checking in and with what other councils are doing to make sure that Vincent is staying as contemporary as possible, learning from other people's mistakes, and I'm still looking for opportunities to lead the way with the live streaming and the accessibility to our council meetings.
Thank you, Councillor Harley. Councillor Toppelberg.
Just very quickly, for me, this is, we've spoken a lot about the risks associated with it, and I struggle to see a lot of those myself, but I just think I agree with Councillor Howlett. It's about it being a natural progression, but for me, the examples are simple, and whilst whether you talk about accessibility issues or otherwise, even just a convenience issue. Gave an example to somebody today. Somebody's out of town and they're or not able to attend a meeting where they assumed that their development that was recommended for approval receives a refusal. They don't have to go then and take officers' time as to exactly why, what was the debate, who said what or other. They can sit there, they can watch, they can learn that perhaps the setback issue on the second floor was more of an issue for council than the officers had seen it to be, and they can address those issues. So I think that we'll actually, in the medium term, we'll actually end up getting better outcomes because the debate, we won't be subjecting people to 3 or 4 hours of sitting here to have to hear their item. That's a key thing as well. And people will be able to interact with council, and I'm sure we're not that far away from people being able to have it actually be interactive and be able to ask their questions or otherwise remotely, and we'll be having a Q&A style questions taken online before at the beginning of council meeting. It will absolutely happen because it just makes things easier for everybody, and I think that this is a clear part of our accessibility and accountability move, and I'm very happy that it's come to this, and look forward to endless hours of sitting in bed and watching old council meetings. Councillor Harley.
Councillors? Look, I'll just make a few comments. I'd just like to point out that it was only just 4 months ago that we actually started to live stream our council meetings, and I think that the results have been quite pleasing in terms of the number of people that have been tuning in. Obviously, council meetings are more popular, which makes sense. The briefing figures are not as good, but council meetings, we started off with 118 unique viewers, and we've been averaging around the sort of the 70 to 80 mark. And if you consider that there are 80 seats in our public gallery, it gives you a bit of a visualisation that we're effectively potentially doubling the amount of people that are tuning into our council meetings. So that's really pleasing, and I think that it did exceed our early expectations around what this could deliver. So it's really natural for us then to take this next step in terms of actually providing bookmarked and archived access to our meetings on our website, that this is the natural next step. It's no additional cost to the City of Vincent, so it makes sense from that perspective. Our initial startup was about $16,000 to get the equipment happening. We've now got a good understanding of the system and how it works with our upgraded website, which quite frankly, I think is operating really well for a new website. I'd just also like to point out that we are the first. We love to point out when we're first, and Vincent likes to push the envelope, particularly when it comes to transparency and accountability. It's a signature platform of the City of Vincent, and we are the first council in WA to provide the full service of live web streaming along with online archive and bookmarking. Some councils have different combinations in terms of audio, etc., but in terms of the trifecta, we're the first to do it. So really pleased to be able to say that, and really pleased to be taking this further step forward on transparency. And yeah, I'm just really keen to see how that works for the community as well. So if anyone out there has any feedback, please do feel free to send it in.
Sorry,
Councillor
can I just
Toppelberg.
ask just a question through you to, or perhaps to the CEO, you may wish to direct it to the Manager of Governance. Just in relation to the timings, is it intended that it will be uploaded at the same time as the minutes, or will the web streaming be available next day? Like, what's the process in terms of bookmarking, timing, etc.? Because I know that's obviously in terms of accessibility and decision making, there's an expectation that it's fairly readily available, but does it need to wait for the authorisation of minutes?
Through you, Mayor, the vendor guarantees to have the bookmarks up within 48 hours, but our experience to date has been they're generally up the next day.
So just further to that, because the policy is silent on it, are we to expect as a council that within 48 hours of the meeting that this will be up, or does that need to be amended in the policy if that's our desire?
Through you, Mayor, that's the service level we have, agreement we have with the vendor, and so that's what's going to occur regardless of a policy position or otherwise.
Any further comments, Councillor Toppelberg?
So I'm going to move an amendment, if I may. So just to clause 6, the proposed change to the clause says the archive web stream will be made freely available to the public via the City's website, just to insert the words as soon as practicable, unless otherwise determined by the presiding member. So it just obviously within the remit of the vendor, but so just to insert the words as soon as practicable after the word website.
Is there a seconder for that amendment? Councillor Buckles, do you wish to speak further to it? Councillor Buckles, anyone wish to speak to the amendment? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? Declare it carried. There is a further amendment. I'm not sure if anyone's interested in that one. Councillor Hallett, do you wish to move it? Sorry, I thought you were indicating. I'm not trying to pressure you to move an amendment. I'll just clarify. Do I have a seconder for the amendment? Councillor Loden.
So this amendment just makes it, I guess, clear that we've agreed to archive council meeting web streams since we began the web streaming. So the archive that's currently available internally will then be made publicly available on the City's website, as well as the ones that are going forward.
Councillor Loden, do you wish to speak? Councillor Toppelberg.
So it relates in part to this, and I will ask the CEO. The new website's been live for some time, and there have been questions, I know, both internally from staff and elected members and community about the availability of our minutes prior to 2011. So currently 2012 onwards is indexed and available. 2011 is there, not indexed, but prior to that is still not available. Can we get an indication as to when that might be uploaded again to the web, because there are often circumstances where people need to refer back beyond that time?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I can't give you an indication, but I can advise that I've spoken to relevant staff and that's being actioned.
Any further comments or questions? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? I declare it carried. We're back at the substantive. Does anyone wish to speak to the substantive? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare it carried unanimously. We're now going back to the beginning of the meeting to item 9.1, number 44 Brisbane Street, Perth, change of use from office to non-medical consulting rooms. So just give Councillor Hallett a moment. Do I have a mover for this item? Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Loden. Councillor Toppelberg.
Just question. The 3 car parking bays that are shown on site are currently not accessible. I mean, currently as in they're currently being used for storage. That's a very loose term for what's currently on site. Just in terms of compliance, are we able to, I guess it's not a question, it's probably more so a statement, but just to make sure that those 3 bays are actually accessible as vehicle bays?
Yes, through the Mayor, those bays will be required to be made available and cleared.
Councillor Loden, does anyone else wish to speak to this item? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare it carried. Okay, we're moving to 10.1, replacement electric bike, Vincent Community Bike Library. This is an absolute majority decision. Moved Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Buckles. Councillor Buckles, do you wish to speak to the item? Does anyone wish to comment? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare it carried. Now moving to 11.1, which is termination of lease and options for future use at 245 Vincent Street, Leederville. Do I have a mover for this item? Councillor Murphy, seconded Councillor Harley.
Thank you. Yes, so just to give you a little bit of a background, this isn't a veiled attempt to try and force the sale of this property. It came about simply because my friend around the corner a couple of weeks ago sold his house for an additional, for quite a significant amount above what he was asking for, and I thought, well, it would be worth council having all the information. I know that the value.
Councillor Murphy, it appears you might be talking to the amendment. I'm just wondering if you wish to move the amendment and speak to it.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure. Sorry.
Do I have a seconder for the amendment? Councillor Buckles.
Sorry, thanks. Yeah, I would like to move the amendment, which is to delete item 2, 3 and 4 and replace with 2, approves the advertising of an expression of interest for the sale or lease of 245 Vincent Street, Leederville, in order to inform decisions regarding the future use and ownership of the property. And item 3 notes a report will be submitted to council at the conclusion of the expression of interest process in recommendation 2, above for council to consider disposition options including sell or lease in accordance with the requirements of section 3.58 of the Local Government Act. So I believe that essentially I believe that the property could be of greater value than the 600,000 suggested by administration, and I would like to test the market, so to say, and find out if there would be any interest above 600,000 from people to purchase the land, and also just to get an indication of the lease value from the market, to come back for a final determination from council where we've got the full proper facts. So yes, I hope.
Councillor Harley, do you wish to speak? Oh, apologies. Sorry, Councillor Buckles.
That's quite all right. Look, I support this amendment because, for the most part, I actually I appreciate that we sometimes own buildings for community use, but I'm not necessarily convinced that we need to own buildings to put out to the private rental market. To me, if we're looking at private renting it to people who want to live there, we should be looking at disposing of it. So I'd rather go down this path before we were to consider spending money to fit it out as a residential kitchen, because I also feel that if someone was to buy it and wanted to live in it as a house, they'd probably put in a nicer kitchen than we'd be prepared to put in, so it could well be money thrown away.
Councillor Hallett and then Councillor Toppelberg.
I guess just a question to the Director to clarify whether that report that will come to council would also include community service options as well as, I guess, private sale or lease.
Through the Chair, it will totally depend on what submissions are received. So if we receive submissions from community groups, they will certainly be presented.
Councillor Hallett, do you wish to comment further? Councillor Doppelberg.
Thank you. Just a question in relation to how a local government EOI for sale or lease of a property of this nature would actually go out to EOI. What the methods of advertising? Is it, yeah, if we can just get some indication of what is proposed and whether that's appropriate for the site and the location?
Through the Chair, we're still working out the details of how that would occur, but we would generally do that certainly via an advertising and on the website. And also to note that in the event that we did receive submissions for the sale in particular of that land, then we would still have to go back out to the community again and advertise in accordance with the requirements of the Local Government Act, which would mean we would definitely at that point have to advertise it in paper circulating in the local district. But I would anticipate that we would certainly have ads in the local paper, but we may also want to take that a bit wider in that respect to actually seek broader interest in the sale in particular.
So, given the site's location, I would imagine. So, for example, how would it be expected that Leederville Connect would become aware that there was a property within the Leederville area that was for sale or lease? That I wouldn't imagine that we would expect them to be reading through a local paper to look at a property advertisement. So, how would we expect to be interacting with from a community basis there or otherwise? And to go further to Councillor Hallett's question in relation to engaging with active community organisations, so whether that's through social media or otherwise, is that to be included in the process?
Yeah, that's correct. We actually have a community database that we would certainly make sure that they were informed, in particular for the leasing opportunities.
Councillor Loden.
Through the Chair, roughly how long would it take to go from now through to potentially being able to sell this property? Is it going to be sitting there vacant for that whole time?
Through the Chair, I would certainly anticipate that we would, if we receive submissions for the sale of the property, as I indicated, that would then have to be reported to Council, and Council would then have to comply with the requirements of Section 358(3), which would mean we would then have to go back out to advertise that submission and potentially either bring that back to Council or Council would need to grant delegated approval to the CEO to consider any submissions that may be received. Given that time frame, I would be surprised if we'd be talking this side of Christmas.
Do we have the opportunity to lease the facility out whilst we're doing this?
We have, through the Chair, we have no submissions at the moment in terms of any interest to lease, and so we would have to consider the implications of the Local Government Act in terms of entering into any lease. So if there was an interested party in leasing it in the interim, depending on who they were, would depend on whether we'd be in a position to go straight to lease. But again, if it was lease, other than what's recommended in this report, which is rental, we would have to. That's not a approval that would be required by Council, but a lease would be required to be approved by Council.
Sorry, just to clarify there. So I guess my question was more if we continued with the appointing of a suitably qualified and experienced agent to rent the property out to a residential lease for 6 months whilst we figured out if we did want to sell the property or not. Was that possible?
Through the chair, it's possible. Whether it's practical, because again, we'd need to be looking for a potentially short-term rental, which may or may not be attractive, and particularly if we were having to spend $7,000 or $8,000 to just for the 6-month rental, which potentially may or may not be adding to the value in respect to the future resale.
Through you, Chair. I'm really torn about this one because I'm actually very supportive of us selling off land, spare bits of land we could find, and buildings which are commercially viable to do so. But I'm really torn about this one because I can name at least 2 or 3 people who I think would definitely want to purchase this land, and I don't think they'll be wanting to keep it as a cute cottage. So in opening this door, my concern is that not about having the debate. I'd be happy to have the debate about why I wouldn't support, unless somebody was suddenly offering us $3 million for the plot of land or something like that, then I'd have to think about it. But so I've got some questions in regards to the heritage listing and for the record, and in regards to how easy it would be for a future owner / potential developer to take that house off the heritage register. Anyone?
Who would like to tackle that question? CEO, in the absence of the directors shouting over here to jumping to answer, I'll throw that one to you.
Sure, why not? Thank you, Mayor Cole. Council members, page 364 of the agenda papers addresses some of the issues that Councillor Harley has raised. I note that the cottage is included in the city's municipal heritage inventory as management category A, page 364. So it's identified as management category A, conservation essential. That was from 2006, and the heritage inventory includes the following information. The weatherboard house is a fine and notable example of a late colonial cottage style, has associations with the Byrne family, early residents of Leederville, and it goes on to provide a little bit more detail there. The subsequent paragraph notes that the land zoned urban under the region scheme, residential R80 under current town planning scheme number 1, and under the city's proposed or draft town planning scheme number 2, which is still with the Minister for final gazettal and consideration, is the zoning would be regional centre, and any development would be governed by the Leederville Master Plan built form guidelines. The statement does go on to say that due to the heritage nature of the cottage, any development would need to comply with the city's heritage management policy, which would restrict development opportunities. So, long story short, I think under the circumstances, given the heritage listing of the property, having inspected the property myself and owning a similar aged cottage, I agree with the evaluation that's included in the heritage inventory, and I would expect that the Leederville Master Plan built form guidelines and the subsequent Leederville Activity Centre Master Plan will have regard to the heritage considerations or the heritage value of that property, and I think it will make it difficult for the property to be developed for higher density purposes, notwithstanding its proposed regional centre zoning under TPS2.
Thank you. I had read that part, but I just don't think that that cuts it. So my question was, how easy is it for a future developer to get this taken off the heritage registry? And I asked that having lived in a very unique heritage listed property, which is now been completely demolished, and a hotel sits on the side, and it was never, ever, ever allowed to be touched, and before you know it, off it came. I just want, for the record, for you to run through how a future... Let's think 5 years ahead, 10 years ahead. This is a very special property, and don't want to get into all the debate about that necessarily, but I suspect there will be a significant debate about it if and when it arises. This is R80, so let's think forward 10 or 15 years to another town planning scheme when this plot of land becomes even on the city fringe more and more valuable. Different council, a whole range of things could happen. I just, for the record, want people to know how hard or how easy it is for an owner of a property to get this property taken off the city's heritage inventory, and whether it's on the state register. I beg your pardon.
Through you, Mayor Cole, my understanding is that it is not on the state heritage register. Notwithstanding that, the ease with which the proposal could be removed from the city's municipal heritage inventory is really up to the voting members in this room. If someone were to apply to delete the place from the inventory, then in accordance with the policy, they would need to provide justification as to why that is the case, and that justification would need to be in respect of the heritage value of the place, not just their aspiration to do something else with the property. Having said all of that, the complication, the reason I can't provide a explicit response to the bigger issue here is that under changes to the relevant planning regulations that came into effect a couple of years ago, I can't recall and would not be able to very quickly find for you the provision that relates to the entitlement to demolish in the absence of a planning approval. That is a relevant consideration, but I would need to explore that a little more closely. Notwithstanding that, it's worth noting that if, and it's still based on the recommendation and the amendment before Council, it is only an if. So if Council ever in future made a decision to dispose of the property in terms of sale, then in doing so, Council could impose a caveat on the land that restricts what could occur, and then as a matter of contract law, because the caveat would be in Council's favour, then Council could stipulate the future development restrictions that could apply to that property.
Thank you. On that basis, I'm not going to support the amendment. This is not a pathway that I believe we should go down with this property. I'd be very happy for it to, come back to a councillor workshop and look through the full history. I don't think, I don't even want to consider selling this property, and I certainly don't want to consider selling it on an amendment. And I know that's not before us now, but once we open that door and we put it out there and we get that valuation, we are perhaps creating an expectation. We are opening the door to it, and I just don't think that was the intention of what it was we were trying to do. And until there are much stronger controls in place around these types of properties, I wouldn't be supportive at all of considering. As I said, everything's got a price, right? Or everyone's got a price, and we would not, in the interest of ratepayers, be able to just not have a great offer in front of us and say we're definitely not looking at that. But this building itself has an intrinsic value to the community which goes beyond the actual property values, so I'm not going to support the amendments.
Councillors? Look, I have something else to add to the debate here, and I think that where I'm coming from is more around talks about in the report the broader strategic assessment of the city's land holdings, and I'm also mindful of the fact that we're doing our public open space strategy. And while this is a cottage and not necessarily open space, one of the things that we have flagged through the development of our public open space strategy is that generally, and this is not committed to policy at this time, but the discussions have been around if we are going to commit to land sales, and we would like to have in place a ability to potentially put that into a reserve. Thank you. I've just lost that word. To put it into a reserve which would be tied to purchase of open space. So as part of that process, my understanding was that we were going to do a strategic review of land holdings to look at the properties across Vincent that the City of Vincent owns, and to make an assessment across the board. And I can think of houses that are nowhere near as charming and not heritage listed for example, that we're, I think that for me, I would like to have that more holistic approach where we've actually looked at all of the land holdings, that we've potentially established a reserve for our to support our public open space strategy before we then embark on decisions of selling public assets of this nature. So I don't know whether, in terms of the report talking about the broader strategic assessment of the city's land holdings, I might just ask the Director of Corporate Services what sort of time frame we're looking at for that assessment, and also to the Director of Community Services how that then ties into the way in which we potentially develop a reserve to support the public open space strategy.
Through the chair, I can say that at this point we certainly don't have an item on the CBP in respect to the strategic assessment, but we are progressively working our way through areas of constraint that we understand are on some of our land, and once we have a better handle on that, we will be able to launch into that review, but I would anticipate it would be in the following financial year.
Thank you.
And through you, Mayor Cole, in terms of the public open space strategy, the scope of the strategy will identify areas within the city that have a perceived gap of public open space, whether that be from an amenity perspective or a physical provision of open space. So that is one of the key outcomes from the public open space strategy, and I don't want to preempt the outcomes of this strategy, but I suspect that potential land acquisition and the creation of a public open space reserve will be two mechanisms within that strategy. That will then provide the basis, subject to that more strategic analysis of the city's land holdings, to then potentially utilise those land holdings for that purpose.
Thank you. So, look, that's basically why I won't support the amendment, but also the fact that I know that this amendment is just saying to go out to market, to lease and to sale, but also based on the advice that it would be difficult to then tenant the house and that the city would be foregoing the income while exploring that. It's actually quite a costly exercise to the city if you can consider that that the maintenance costs weren't being met by the previous tenant, and the recommendation from officers before us is to go down the rental pathway so that we actually are breaking even with the costs in maintaining this cottage. I think to forgo that rental income while exploring the sale of this property is a cost that I'm not prepared to also to support. So on the basis of those reasons, I won't support the amendment. Councillor Loden.
So for me, I guess this comes down to similar to what the Mayor said around if there was a way, if this was an existing asset that we were renting out to the residential market, I think it would be entirely appropriate for us to go and test the market and find out what this could sell for. We could continue to lease it whilst that piece of work is going on, and then at the point of time when the offer comes in, we can then make a decision on if that is value for the city. I think I'm pretty confident that this is a poorly utilised asset for the city, and that capital value could be better utilised elsewhere very easily without having to go through a detailed analysis of every single property in the site, in the city. However, because it's not leased at this point in time, and we're going to basically be holding it for up to 6 months until that EOI comes in and then potentially decide not to sell it, my preference is that we lease that site now and get it to support itself and maintain it, which is an ongoing challenge that we have across the city. But then I could very well see that this would then be sold at a future date.
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
I have spoken on it. Look, I just wanted to check that I've interpreted the report correctly, but the costs of fitting out the kitchen appear to be about 6 months' worth of rent compared to letting it sit there unleased for 6 months while we explore the options. Is that correct?
Through the chair, I'm just looking for the financials. My recollection, so 22,000 to 24,000 for a year, so 7, something less than 6 months' worth.
Councillor Murphy, as the mover, you're closing debate, so before you speak, I'll just see whether anyone who hasn't spoken wishes to speak to the item. No? Okay, go ahead. You're closing debate.
Just got a question, actually. If we were to...
Oh, sorry, that's right. You don't have the right of reply and amendment, so please go ahead and ask your question.
Just in regards to... So if we were to go and approve the item as is, we would go out to seek interested... well, it says manage a residential lease. So we'd go and find an agent, and then they would have to go out and find suitable lessees. What would be the time frame for that process, would you think, roughly?
I would anticipate that that would be a relatively short time frame. We've already been out for quotation, so within days we could appoint an agent, and they could be looking at their database pretty quickly to get a tenant. The longest part of the process might well be the fit out for the kitchen.
And so how long would that fit out take, sorry?
I think it was 2 to 3 weeks.
Councillors, are there any further comments on the amendment? I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? All those against? I declare the amendment carried. We're back to the substantive. Are there any further comments on the substantive?
I have some comments, Chair. It's obviously been amended, so I'm going to gear up for the debate about selling a heritage property. I'm going to foreshadow a move to put that cottage on the state heritage register, or at least find out what the steps are for us as a council to put our money where our mouth is and to demonstrate our commitment to heritage, which is something we've been so vocal about as a council, at least in the time I've been here and no doubt before. I just want to talk about 2 areas of this report, which is on page 364 and 365, which specifically deals with disposal of the land, which actually probably would have made that amendment not necessary. When this came to the workshop, I thought we were pretty... Pardon? When this came to a workshop, I thought we were pretty clear about what it was we were seeking. The issue of selling of assets always kind of gets bandied around, but I did think that we were pretty clear that what we were seeking was a lease. So I was surprised when I got this report to find that actually there's 2 sections specifically dealing with potential disposal, and it enables the administration to consider it appropriate to investigate disposition options. My question through you, Chair, to the CEO is, how did we go from having a property which has been leased for many years to coming to a council workshop where we discussed rental to including in a report options for the administration to look at disposition of the land? When have we had that debate about whether we wish to sell this particular property?
Councillor Harley, I'd argue that that's here and now. It's open to any council member to move an amendment of this nature.
So thank you. I guess my procedural point is this is just in the body of the report, so I'd like some advice about whether I can ask to have certain sections of this report taken out. I thought what we were dealing with were the recommendations, and the recommendations only deal with lease, but embedded in this report gives full imprimatur to the administration to look at selling the property, and I think we need a proper debate on it.
Through you, Mayor Cole, with respect, Councillor Harley, I disagree. The purpose of including that information in the report is so that Council is fully informed of the options that are available. The Council workshops, rightly so, are for discussion and debating purposes. They're not decision-making forums, and they are also, with respect, not serving a purpose of directing staff what to include in reports or recommend to council. In this instance, administration has attempted to provide the most comprehensive assessment of the options that are available to council in considering this matter. Administration has itself recommended that the property be made available for residential rental purposes and has explained the rationale and the justification as to how administration has reached that conclusion. But none of that eliminates the options that are available to council at law in dealing with a property at this point in time where the current lessee is seeking to break their lease. The first issue for council to determine is the termination of that lease. What, if anything, council does beyond that is entirely up to council to make that decision, and the information has been included in the report to assist council in that regard.
So I'm just wondering if this is one of those examples where we should break the motion and vote separately, whether we should consider voting separately on Clause 1 and Clause 2 and 3 as two separate votes.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, it's your prerogative under the standing orders to direct that the motion be put in separate parts.
Okay, before doing that, I do just want to make some comments. Look, my view is that land sales should happen in within a strategic framework and in a strategic manner, and that I would support land sales in the context of acquiring public open space. And I don't believe that, given that our public open space strategy is under development and that we haven't yet worked our way through that and established a reserve and had that conversation, had an assessment of what properties may or may not warrant sale. I don't support ad hoc sale of property in this way, and I know that this doesn't tie us to that sale, but I won't support the motion parts 2 and 3 as they stand, because I believe that it's very important to have a strategic approach in relation to land sales based on the policies that are developed and based on a clear direction and a conversation that we can have with our community around why we're selling land and where that money will be spent. So on that basis, I won't be supporting clauses 2 and 3. I will split the motion and I will call for a vote in relation to clause 1 and separately clause 2 and 3. But before doing so, I'll just see whether any councillors have any comment. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. I'm pretty disappointed with the way that the debate has gone. I don't see this as ad hoc land sale at all. I think that Councillor Murphy was... I mean, if you look at the way people view... This is... I agree wholeheartedly with Councillor Harley in terms of the retention. I think that we have put our money where our mouth is. This sits in our Category A in our Municipal Heritage Inventory, which is protected under our scheme, which is the absolute most protection we can possibly afford it as a council. If we wish to make application to the state, that's a separate matter, but I do think that we've made our commentary around that, and the answer is that there is no way this property can be demolished unless the people in this room decide that it can be, and the same goes if it's on the state list as well. The people in that room can make that decision as well. So I think that it has been afforded that protection. But for me, and the reason why I supported the amendment, I wasn't going to speak to the item at all, but we don't know what to do with this property. It's superfluous to our needs. We understand the history of it, and we were a significant part of the recent history of it, and it's an important part of Vincent's story, but we don't know what to do with it. I personally think that the idea of leasing it out residentially while we think about it is potentially not its best use, and it may well be that the best chance for preservation, enhancement and achieving our goals for it is only attractive to somebody if they can own the property, because they would require to invest in it. We may well get a community organisation that wishes to preserve the cottage and enhance and open it up to community, which to me is a far better use than actually having it as a residential lease. I have no interest in selling it, and I don't think in any way what's before us as what now sits as the substantive motion binds us in any way other than to literally see what's out there. And I fear that if we went to see what was out there in terms of a residential lease, a council 2, 3, 5 years down the track or otherwise would be sitting and saying, well, how the hell did we end up owning a house that we're renting out to people through an agent? Because that, to me, seems like an odd path to go down. And if we're talking strategically, I think that we're yet to have the debate about whether land sales should be funding public open space or otherwise, and I think that each property should be looked at on its merits, and I'm happy, as I say, I'm a little bit disappointed with the way that the debate has been shifted towards potentially selling the property. To me, it is purely going out to an EOI to ask our community and the broad community what is the best use for this land that we happen to own.
Through you, Chair, I have a question in regards to splitting the motion, because the amendment has removed the option for us to replace the kitchen and other things. I want to ask the administration whether that is, if that is still something that administration can do. Did it need to come to us at all? But now that that amendment has gone up, what chance do we have of renting it out without doing that work? Can you provide some options?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the circumstance that might arise in response to what Councillor Harley has just identified is if the first recommendation was put by the Mayor and the vote on that is successful, or the for vote wins that, then that deals with the termination of the lease. If items 2 and 3, because in my view they're really quite intertwined, if the vote on items 2 and 3 fails, then administration will submit a further report back to council to ask council what is it now that you would like to do with this property in recognition of the fact that as it currently stands, and in the absence of any further amendment or additional motion, the only thing that, under what I've just described, would occur is council agreeing to the mutual termination of the lease and nothing more. Administration would not be spending any money on the property in respect of enhancing or doing up the kitchen or anything else.
Through you, Chair, can I move a deferral of this item, please? I'd like to move a deferral of this item.
Do I have a seconder for deferral of the item? Councillor Buckles. I'll put it. All those in favour of deferral? All those against? Deferral has carried. That brings us to the last item for the evening, which is a late item 17.1, Vincent Greening Plan 2017 Garden Competition. Do I have a mover for this item? Moved Councillor Loden, seconded Councillor Harley. Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Chair. Quick question through to the Director of Community Services. I believe there was discussions at a RAP working group of having a RAP workshop on the 7th of October, tentatively suggested that as that date, and I was just wondering if that is happening or not.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I wasn't actually at the last RAP meeting for that conversation, so I'm not aware if that is the case or not, but we could certainly amend the date for that RAP workshop if there is indeed a clash.
Councillors, does anyone wish to nominate to take up the third position on the garden competition? It is a very fun day out. You'll enjoy it, I can assure you.
You could do it, Councillor. It's your last one.
No,
yes,
no one
they
has
have,
nominated.
But it's now vacant. Sorry.
Jonathan nominated twice.
I'd love to go out and doing it again, but I thought, I got told I wasn't allowed to do it again.
and I'm going with it. Let's give... Oh, you have got plans.
I have to check with my wife. I might be going camping that weekend.
Well, while Councillor Buckles is texting his wife, is there a backup option from council?
As a point of clarification, I'm out of the state. That is my personal reason, so it's not... personal reasons could be interpreted as a million things, but I do love our garden competition. I do love a good broad bean on a October morning, but unfortunately I will not be in the vicinity.
Thank you, Councillor Toppelberg, for your explanation.
What time is it? I've got something in the evening.
All day.
I could do that. I can do that. I've got something in the afternoon.
We'd like to give the Acting Director of Technical Services a go on the microphone. It's given that he's come along to the meeting tonight, so it's your time to shine.
Through you, Madam Mayor Cole, yeah, it commences at 8 a.m. through to 12 p.m. is the judging.
Only a half-day commitment. Are you sure, Councillor Buckles? Okay. All right. Well, we have Councillor Murphy is offering. Councillor Buckles may be otherwise engaged, so we'll accept Councillor Murphy's nomination, and I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried. That was the last item for the evening, so I declare the meeting closed at 9:34 p.m. Thank you.